Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to do some fun techniques with stamps. We're going to make some fun backgrounds with alcohol inks. I'm going to show you 3 different techniques to use your alcohol inks to create some really beautiful backgrounds. And I have a bunch of them, kind of leftover ones here spread across my table. We're going to have so much fun, and you're going to end up with a bunch of extras and leftovers for future projects. Now it is July, and a lot of people like to do Christmas in July, get a head start on your Christmas projects. So today I'm going to use some stamps from our sponsor, topflightstamps.com. I'm using these gorgeous stamps from Crafty Individuals that you saw me use before Christmas time last year, and we're gonna make some cards. We're gonna do some really fun techniques, and I'm gonna show you some different options for coloring these images and using our beautiful alcohol ink background so that you can get the most out of your materials. Now, if you want any of the supplies I used today, I'll link them up in the video description. Make sure you use the coupon code thefrugalcrafter10 at topflightstamps.com to save 10% on your order, and also orders over 50 ship free. So I just want to make sure you know the deal before you go shopping, because these are super cute and you're probably going to want to grab a couple of these gorgeous stamps. So without further ado, let's get inky and make some beautiful backgrounds. I want to share this really fun technique that I learned from Sally Lynn McDonald from Gel Press at a stamp show a couple months ago. So what you have is your gel press, or your jelly press, or whatever printing plate you have, the jelly kind, or gelatin, actual gelatin plate, and then you're going to put a stencil down on it, and then you're just going to, make sure it's stuck down good by brayering over it. You do want a fairly clean plate. Obviously it doesn't have to be pristine, but just, kind of clean. Then you're going to take some alcohol inks, and I'm using inks from Pinata and from Ranger. It doesn't really matter as long as they are they're alcohol ink. You could use like Copic reinkers, or any sort of alcohol ink will be fine. I wonder if you could even use like a liquid watercolor. That might even work, I'm not sure. But alcohol ink for sure. And then you're going to brayer that over your stencil. And I'm just using this little kind of polka dot stencil that I have that's kind of distressed looking, because I think it would be a nice background, because I just want some texture and some coolness in my background. And I'm just kind of bouncing my brayer around to make sure all the holes get a little bit of ink in them. And then I'm just going to peel off the stencil while it's still wet. And then what I could do with this is actually just stick it down. I've got another plate off camera here. I'll just show you. I'm just going to stick it down on that. Obviously I wouldn't pick up my plate normally, but I'll do that just so that I don't waste that and I can do something else with it. Now the ink is still wet there, and you can see like some of the ink is mooshed around, and I don't really have a really strong design for my stencil, so you really can use any type of stencil you want. You don't have to worry about it not fitting with whatever you're doing. And then you could just like press some stamps or anything you have to give texture onto your plate. Sometimes I'll use embossed cardstock and stuff like that. I get a piece of embossed cardstock right here. I'll just get that in a couple spots. And this is going to just pull up some of the ink. And then what you're going to do is you want to brayer on some paint so that you can pick this up. So what I'm actually going to do, I just picked up my stencil from a plate that I had sitting nearby, and I'm just going to pull off a print from that, which was just junk basically. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now I'm going to take some acrylic paint. I've got some green acrylic paint here, and I'm just putting it on my plate, and I am going to just get some on my brayer here. Don't get too much. I made the mistake of putting too much on my brayer, and then I had so much it wouldn't transfer anything. So you're just gonna go over that to lay a coat of paint down so that you'll be able to pick up your print. You could let that even dry fully, like you could walk away, have a cup of tea, and come back and do this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is grab a piece of white cardstock, and it doesn't have to be glossy or anything special, even though we're working on alcohol ink. It can be just normal white cardstock or white paper. Cardstock's nice if you know you're going to card make with it, because then you have that heft. And then you just get a really interesting, just a really interesting look. And that's one print. You didn't have to do a bunch of stuff to that. And you can repeat that. I just like to use just random types of stencils. Maybe I'll try to do something that's a little more Christmassy. Let me just make sure that's stuck down well. And what I also like is that you end up with some cool, you end up with all of these interesting patterns from the prints you did before. But I like this because it lets me use a supply I didn't use very much, which is alcohol ink, and it just kind of gives you something very interesting looking with one pass. You don't have to keep overlaying and making a big ordeal out of it. You can just do this fairly quickly with a limited amount of mess. Okay, so I want kind of a dark blue kind of color for my background here. I'm going to lift that up. That's a very interesting stencil. I like that. I'll press a little bit of texture into it. I think I'm going to go with the green again just because I'm trying to do some Christmas cards today. So I want to have, you know, just some blues or greens, just something I could put in a background of a Christmas card. And hopefully that's dry enough and I don't smear it. Oh, it's letting me pick that up fine. I tend to be really heavy-handed with whatever I use, so I have to be a little aware that I don't go overboard. But I can see that the ink is showing through there. So the stuff that we put down first ends up being the front of our print, and then the paint we put on at the end ends up being a backdrop. And again, I'm going to link to Sally's tutorial on the Gel Press YouTube channel, so you can check that out. And, you know, I learned it from her. She came up with this. It's just so fun and awesome. And when I saw it at the stamp show, I'm like, I need to know how to do that. All right. Oh yeah, look at that. It just gives you such an interesting look that's really kind of unique. Now, Sally did give me one of her prints from the stamp show. I'm going to show you it right there. And I think it just looks so amazing. So just a really fun technique that you can try. Again, check out Sally's video because you will learn even more from the pro who invented the technique. So now we're going to clean up our mess and we're going to make our cards. This next alcohol ink technique I want to share is a marbling technique, and it's another one I learned at the stamp show. And as you can see, it produces beautiful results, interesting results. I don't know if you call them beautiful so much on their own, but they're really cool when you stamp on top of them, on glossy cardstock, which is what this is, and also on your photo paper. So you do not need to have a glossy cardstock. In fact, I think the photo paper might actually be a little bit prettier for this technique. So what you need is a bucket of water, a pail of water, some sort of tray that you can dip your paper into. You probably, if you know you're only going to use smaller paper, you're better off to have a smaller bucket so you don't waste the ink, but you can keep using the same water. You don't have to change it until you're all done and you're ready to dispose of it. And what you're going to do is you are going to use a few drops of alcohol ink on the surface. And I am going to do red. I'm going to do some of the gold alcohol ink mixatives. This is a Ranger product. Any of your big box craft stores should have this, usually in a kit with like gold and silver, or you can get the colors individually. And the reason I like to do a metallic between complementary colors is that it kind of keeps the colors from mixing. It lets them kind of be separate, so I can do red, gold, and green and have kind of distinct colors. And I could even do a little more red on top of the gold. And I do cap my inks up in between uses, even when I might go back to them a second later, just to keep them from drying out. And then you just take a piece of glossy cardstock or photo paper, which is great if you're like me and your mini photo tray doesn't work on your on your printer anymore. Just push it down into the onto the surface of the paper, and there you go, and then you just let it dry completely. Now because this is kind of big, sometimes you can get a couple prints because the bucket is bigger than the paper I'm using, but the second print usually is not as pretty. It doesn't, it's not as bright like your first one here. So that's another reason to kind of keep your tray the same size as your paper so you don't waste the ink. Because you are using quite a few drops of ink and it's probably not the best or most frugal use of your ink, but they are really pretty. When that one dries, it's going to look like this, and it's just a nice background for a card, and it's something else you can do with your alcohol ink. The next fun technique I want to show you is using your alcohol inks on photo paper. Now you can use it on Yupo. I didn't have good luck using it on glossy cardstock for this technique, but photo paper works fantastic for this, and we're going to do a lift. So what you want to do is grab your photo paper, and you can use whatever colors you like, and we're just going to drip some on there. And the reason this works well on photo paper is that there's a layer of coating on the photo paper, so after we put our alcohol inks down, we can use some rubbing alcohol or hand sanitizer to put down a pattern, and then we can wipe it away, because what's going to happen is that it's going to wipe away that top coating on the paper. So your glossy cardstock's a little bit different. Sometimes, a lot of times, the techniques that work on glossy cardstock just don't work well on photo paper, but this is one of those happy accidents when your super cheap leftover photo paper is going to be just fine and dandy. I also think the darker you get this layer, the better it's going to look, so I'm going to put in some more darker green here, just to make it a little bit darker. And I think I may actually throw in some red to really darken that up, because they're opposite colors and they will they'll neutralize each other and give you some really nice dark colors in there. Of course, you can use whatever colors you want. You can go for a more subtle look, you can go for a more defined look. That's completely up to you. So for these examples, this was Yupo, by the way, I used a stencil there. I just put a stencil down and sprayed over rubbing alcohol. I always have a spray bottle of rubbing alcohol for cleanup and also for soap making. This, I used one of the gel press stamps or printing plates, and I think I want to use a different printing plate. I thought this one's really pretty, by Carabelle Studio. So I'm going to grab this one out, and basically all you need is something alcohol-y, like rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle, or you could use hand sanitizer in with like a cosmetic sponge. So if you're going to use hand sanitizer, just take your sponge and blot it on. And sometimes I'll do this and then do a spray of the alcohol on top, because it'll the hand sanitizer is thicker and it will stick really well, but sometimes it's hard to get a really good coating down. There is a new product called an alcohol lift ink, which is designed to work on Yupo. I don't know how it works on photo paper because I don't have it, because I'm not a big fan of specialty inks. I got a one called Castaway once, and I never could get it to work right, so I figured I do it just as well with my DIY solutions. So now I'm going to take this paper that we just inked, and I'm just going to lay it down on here, and I'm going to rub over the back. I want to make sure I get good contact, because it's a printing plate. It doesn't have like foam on it or anything. And it has lifted some design, but the real magic happens when you take a paper towel and you go in and then you rub it. Rub it where the hand sanitizer is, and you're going to rub off some of that design. So here's a way to get a really fun artsy background on a project. If you don't have like a gel plate, you totally can do it with this technique. So that's kind of fun, and you know, it just gives you that nice random artsy background. I'll show you the other versions here where I just put a stencil down and sprayed it and then wiped it. You know, it's not going to give you a perfect impression. It's going to give you a very rustic, distressed impression, but sometimes that's just what you need for a background. Remember, these are backgrounds. They're not the star of the card. They're there just to give you some interest. So, try those different techniques on your next card making journey. It's great for batching up cards, because you get to play, make a big mess, make a bunch of backgrounds, and then you can put them to use on your cards, which we're going to do next. I just cleaned up my workspace and started looking at these really beautiful backgrounds that we had made using the techniques that I just showed you. And I thought, geez, these are so gorgeous. I don't want to cover them up. And I was afraid that if I stamped directly on them, my images really wouldn't pop. So what I decided to do was to use transparency. And I get the inkjet transparencies because then I can stamp with my regular stamping ink and it will dry. And I just put a piece of white cardstock behind it so I could see what I was stamping. And here you can see I've stamped these 3 images in black. I really, really like the Rudolph here, so I think I'm going to stamp a few more of him. And then we're just going to use some paint on the back to adhere it to our cards, and I'll show you that in a second. But I did want to go over stamping on acetate because it is a little slippery. So what you want to do is you want to kind of hover for a minute, make sure you know where you want your stamp to land. Then you're going to gently bring it down and just like a couple fingers on the back. Give it time for the ink to transfer. Now, when you're using the inkjet transparencies, make sure you're stamping on the side that feels a little bit rough. There's a coating on one side that's going to grab your ink and help it dry, kind of like the coating on photo paper that helps our ink dry, and that's going to keep it from smearing. And then you just need to let this dry for a little bit, and you're going to have a really good impression. So stamp out as many images as you want. You want to get this done ahead of time, and then when we come back, we are going to make some cards. One other thing we're going to do, and I'll show you these in the package just so you could see the reindeer, Santa Claus going over the city, and our holly songbirds here. That's the little holly berries there. We're also going to stamp this on cardstock and color it with whatever medium you like. So I'm going to stamp this on some marker cardstock and color it with alcohol markers and cut them apart for embellishments. I know these are all going to go together because they're from the same line of stamps, so that's another way to simplify your process when you are creating, and it can seem a little overwhelming because you've got so many aspects going on. So finish up your stamping and we'll come back and we'll start putting things together. All right, I have cut up a bunch of our fun backgrounds. I just used a book plate die. This one's by Doris. You can also just trim it into rectangles. It doesn't really matter, but I wanted to cut it into a shape so I'd have a little space left on my card. And what I did was I just basically cut some cardstock in half and scored it down the middle so I would have these A2 size cards ready to go. I also cut down a bunch of scrapbook paper and made some envelopes, and I have the scraps over here to the side so that I can use those for embellishing my card. So I am going to use my bone folder just to make sure I have a nice crisp fold, and now we're going to start putting a card together. Now, remember we stamped on some transparencies, right? Well, something you can do with these that are kind of cool. So if I just set it on the card there, you can clearly see our impression. However, I'm just afraid that if I put it on top of a background that's a little busy, some of it's going to get lost. So, and we also have the kind of challenge when you're adhering transparencies is how do you attach them without seeing glue or using a brad or whatever, which is fine. But I didn't want to see glue, and I wanted to try to keep it a little bit less, less obvious to what it is. So what I decided to do was try a couple things. One thing is to color the other side of the transparency. So I stamped on the rough side, and now I'm coloring on the smooth side with alcohol markers because they will dry. You don't want to use your water-based markers for this because they will pool up and they're not going to dry, but your alcohol markers will work perfectly for this, and they're not going to interact with what we're going to use for the adhesive, which is going to be acrylic paint. So just try to do a very basic, simple coloring style when you do this. You don't want it to take you forever. You're really not going to notice the detail. And give him a little red nose like Rudolph there. You're not going to notice the detail, so just keep it really, really simple. Like I'm just doing a little bit of that in the corners just to kind of give it a little bit of a Christmas sky, just a blue sky. So I do have one that's already colored and dried. It only takes a second, and I'm just going to grab that here. Now, however much excess you want to leave around the edges is up to you, but I'm going to trim it fairly closely because I'm not going to need to staple it or use a brad or anything. And now we are going to figure out a background that it will look nice on. I think there's a lot of different options here. I kind of like that blue there. Oh, that one looks really neat. I really like that. By the way, I tried that first alcohol ink gel press technique on photo paper, and it worked well too. So you can definitely use your photo paper for whatever you want there. So I am going to grab a little bit of acrylic paint, and I'm just using like an ivory color. This is unbleached titanium, and I'm going to put this on the side I colored on, not the side I stamped on. So it's going to go, I don't think it really matters that much, but that will just make sure that your image is going to be the same way you stamped it. So I'm just kind of looking for the rough side. All right, I'm going to put this on this side. And you can spread it with a brush, or you can just swipe it around with a scrap of cardstock, which is what I'm going to do. And you want to leave it a little chunky in spots, just so that it'll be kind of like our glue. Alright, so I'm just going to just very loosely spackle this on here. And it's okay not to cover everything because it's, you probably want some of that background to show through. And you can experiment and figure out what you like best. So there, look how much better that guy stands out. And I think actually I'm going to stick this onto my card base first, so that way if I want to offset it a little bit I can, because I really love that design, so I don't want to cover all of that up. The nice thing about doing these alcohol ink techniques is that the paper really doesn't buckle, which is really nice. So I'm going to set that down there a little bit, and then when I come in with this, I'm going to have that up here a little higher. And there, I think that looks really, really cool. Now, I didn't want to waste any of my designs here, so I actually ended up cutting out, taking the scraps and cutting out different shapes. So this is just kind of a fun mix and match game, figuring out what you want to use, what embellishments you have on hand, and any stamping you might want to add. So I like to kind of keep my favorite stamps year after year. This one says Peace on Earth, and I like to have my Christmas sentiments on wood blocks because I find that they're just more convenient for me. So I'm just going to stamp that down. I got a really nice impression. And now I'm going to figure out what I want for embellishments. Do you remember this box of Christmas shapes I picked up at the stamp show last month? I knew they would be perfect for my bulk Christmas cards. And I thought this little moose would be perfect here with the deer. So I tried it with like a little one of my little leftover pieces there, and I didn't really like that quite as much as just the moose there on its own. I thought that was just kind of a little bit classier looking, and there's a little bit of red in that print, and I thought it'd be nice to kind of bring that out just by using a little bit of red baker's twine. That way I do get a little bit of classic Christmas colors, you know, in there. So I'm just gonna wrap that around a couple times and tie it on the inside of my card. Then just trim off the excess. I probably should have tied that a little bit tighter. That could be a little bit tighter, but it's alright. I'm sure you'll do it just fine when you do it. And I am going to just glue that down. I could actually even spread apart the twine a little bit since I do have that slack there. That does look kind of cool. And glue him down, and you can use hot glue or any you know, strong adhesive that's going to hold your wooden shapes down. And this should mail just fine because it is pretty flat. I also think this little Christmas tree or evergreen brad would be a nice touch, so I think I'll put him kind of behind the moose there, and it just gives you another element to draw your eye through the picture. I just want to see where that prong is there before I poke my hole. So you will see your little brad legs on the inside of your card. So if that bothers you, then maybe work it on a punch out, or you could put it in that layer there. But this is the first card I've made from this batch, so I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go. But after you get that first card down, you can definitely figure out how you want to do the other ones. So I'm going to go ahead and make up the other cards and show you what I ended up with. I just realized I forgot a fun embellishment that I have prepared. Now, here's the stamped image here, not cut out. You can see it's a postage stamp block, and I thought this stamp was really cool because you can cut out the elements after you color them with postage edge scissors or deckled scissors. You can just tear them out, you know, fold them and tear them or whatever. And then you've got all these wonderful little embellishments that you can cluster on and layer up. And I think they're just like really, really pretty. So I'm gonna put this one here, and this will also help me with my issue of that string being a little slack. So I'll just do a little bit of hot glue on my faux postage here, and then I can layer it up, because I just think layering really really helps and really looks nice. So I mean, it looks good without it too, but you know, it's nice to have that option. It's nice to have the little extra something if you want to add it to your card, and you know, it doesn't really cost you anything. Once you bought the stamp, it's bought and paid for. You might as well use it up if you want to. So I'm not sure if I want it on this one or not. I think that looks kind of pretty as it is, but now that I have them cut out and ready to go, I'm definitely going to work them into my next design. For this card, I decided to do the blue baker's twine, and again, adhere a a jelly printed background. I chose this one that had a little bit of a star motif because I wanted to do Santa in his sleigh, and I just grabbed a ho 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 stamp because I thought that would be really appropriate for Santa Claus. Now this time, instead of using that cream colored paint, I decided I would use a light blue, and I'm just going to again squirt out a little dab on there. It's kind of a periwinkle. It's almost like a purpley blue, which I thought would also look good with that. If you see, when I tip this, I use like an interference color that's got like a purpley sheen when you tip it. And I'm just going to grab another scrap of cardstock, because waste not, want not, right? And we are going to scrape that along. Now, I didn't color this one, so I thought that it would be great to do like a kind of a night sky, and that just saves a little bit of work. And by putting that opaque acrylic paint on the back, that's why you want to go with kind of pastel shades. If you do that opaque paint on the back, you're going to end up with a nice background that will let your stamping show through. Now this one was not my favorite one for this technique because I feel like there was just too much black area, and I feel like this works better if you have more open area in your design. And I grabbed a couple little stamps that I think would look kind of nice here. I've got Rudolph, and I've got this this little sleigh, which I might put over there, and I also had Santa Claus, so I thought that would be kind of nice to kind of have these elements on there as well. Now that said, I think I prefer having the colored elements with the kind of tan paint back there, but it's something different, and it's pretty, and nobody, you know, everyone's going to get one card, right? So it's not like people are going to be comparing their cards with their neighbors. I mean, they all have one card, so I think that works out just fine. And I also added just a couple silver rhinestones to give it a starry look. I don't think I would choose this stamp for this technique again just because it is so dark, but I really adored the way these other ones turned out using this technique. So experiment with the stamps you have and see how you like this technique. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to making up the rest of the cards in this batch. If you want to find the supplies I used, you can find them at topflightstamps.com. Make sure you use the coupon code thefrugalcrafter10 to save 10% on your order, and all orders over 50 ship free. So check them out. They've got some really good stuff, including these stamps that I used today. Thanks so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And until next time, happy crafting.